Yeah, we've been in our camp for going on 6 years this year, and actually been living in the cabin for 3, and we've this third spring will be the 3rd year that we're growing fruit, vegetables and produce in a permaculture garden. I don't know if any of you know what permaculture is, but it's done to the contours of the land. It's not conventional rows of gardening, but we've expanded last year, and this year we hope to take trimmings from our natural plants and our berries and root them and then put them into the permaculture garden, because we're trying to save our berries and our medicines and root plants, because there's been triple the volumes of logging that happen on our territory, and a lot of the areas where we still pick berries and medicines have been badly impacted. So we're going to try and save these plants by replanting them into the permaculture garden and eventually move to other parts of our territory to expand. And I didn't introduce myself. I'm Freda Huson from Winnistata and Camp, spokesperson appointed by my chiefs. And we're down here to speak at various events to let people know what we're doing, and we're building a community in a way of several pipelines that are proposed for our territory, and we only have 10% of our territory left, and that last 10% is being threatened by these pipelines, so we're fighting to protect what's left for future generations so that they may enjoy what we're enjoying right now with that fresh, clean water we can scoop right out of the river and just drink it. And yeah, I'd like to talk more about how we're connected with Wolverine.
Dini Ze Toghestiy, like Freda said, I also want to thank the hosts for welcoming us here. It's one of the most important parts of traveling to other people's territories to make sure that we feel welcomed by the people who actually own the territory. It's integral for everybody to kind of go through that kind of experience. The entire planet should just be a place where people roam freely to do whatever they want. There's people who've looked after these places for thousands upon thousands of years that deserve the recognition and the ability to manage their territories the way they see fit. So it's really important that people understand that it's not a terra nullius landscape that you're walking on. It's actually a territory that is genuinely owned, that should be managed and put fully in control of the people who own those lands, rather than just walking freely and feeling like you have a right to walk from this street to that street, or from here to Stanley Park, or here to the North Shore, without feeling like you're obligated to talk to somebody or ask permission. That shouldn't be the way it is. But that's unfortunately the way it is, and people should look at accommodating a process where you empower the people of the land again. So it's really important that we kind of experience that wherever we go. My name is Toghestiy. I'm a hereditary chief of the Lix Lopez people of the sky, and we're one of the clans, one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and we work with the Winnistata and stopping pipelines from coming through our territories, because immediately west of the Winnistata territory where the blockade is right now is a territory that belongs to my people, and it's called Tlokwa, and it means giant glacier. And there's a lot of stories that talk about the place. It's just an amazing, beautiful place, but it would be one of the first places from the coast that would be impacted by any of these proposed pipeline projects, and we're hell-bent in making sure that we stop them all from coming through. Wolverine has a pretty strong history with us. It started quite a few years ago, about a year before the Olympics that occurred here in Vancouver. It was the first time I had a chance to sit down and actually have a really good, solid conversation with him, and he had a lot of respect for me back then. And I've always admired him for who he is. So it was just amazing to kind of go through this experience with Wolverine and learn about, more about his experience firsthand, but also share a lot about what we want to do back in our traditional territory. And he knew that I was genuine about it. That's one thing he said. He said he sat down with me. We were in a church, in the basement of a church, with this big action called Land Defend. What's it called? Defenders of the Land. There's a big gathering going on in Vancouver here, and I ran into him in the basement after the washroom, and I saw him sitting by himself. So I went and sat down with him, told him how honored I was, and I talked about my upbringing upbringing and some of the stuff that I was taught when I was growing up. And he said, you know, I've sat with a lot of people and not very many people I would give a lot of trust to when they say they're going to do something. And you're one of the people that I can tell is actually somebody who was raised properly to follow through with words and promises that you say. So I'm going to put my trust in you. And he gave us some advice, and he told us to go talk with the medicine man down in South Dakota and in Crow Dog. He said if you're going to start a resistance in your home community, make sure you get the blessings of a really powerful medicine man to guide you. So he told us to make sure that we went and did that. And Freda's niece just graduated with her master's degree in South Dakota at that time. So we went down to the graduation ceremony, and while we're there, I was like, well, we're here, we have to go find Crow Dog. So we went out of our way and drove all over South Dakota and ended up finding him in Nebraska. And just the experience that we had with Crow Dog was like incredibly powerful. Just an amazing man, an incredible spiritual leader. But we had a chance to sit down and talk with him about some of the stuff we're doing, and he gave us a really powerful blessing and prayers, and said that he will continue to do those prayers for us, and told us a prophecy that we had to take up north back home, of what he saw in the future for our people. So we came back and we shared that prophecy with other people, and we ended up building an incredible alliance with other nations that shared the same idea of how that prophecy interprets into our landscape. All of our neighbors that we have heard the prophecy and understood it, and they have their own prophecies, and the prophecy that Crow Dog shared with us was incredibly similar to the prophecies that their people shared. So it's just an amazing way of bringing all of our nations together, and Wolverine is integral to that. You know, the way that he guided us through that process, and the way he continues to guide us today, is something that we have a tremendous and deep amount of respect for. And he's helped us with our camp. He's actually provided a lot of like literally a ton of squash to us, and a lot of potatoes and beets and stuff. And he's just such a giving man. He works his butt off all summer on his garden, and when it's harvest time, he puts it all in his barn, and he calls people up from the front lines to come down to his house. And if they don't, he'll actually get one of his family members to drive him up to the front lines and drop it off himself. And that's actually what he did. He dropped off a lot of squash and beets and potatoes for us from his garden. And we decided to make a trade with him. So we traded him for one of the snowmobiles we had, because he really liked the snowmobiles that we had at the camp. So we came down with the snowmobile and traded him for that. But he said, you know, that's not a part of what he tries to arrange, but he was really thankful and grateful that we were able to do that with him. And he's somebody that I think is integral to frontline defense, more so than any NGO organizers, more so than, you know, people who share it on Facebook. You know, what he does is he actually provides food to the frontline defense of people who are actually out defending their lands. And that's really important, and that's something that we've received a lot of over the last few years, was people doing fundraisers and doing events and awareness, creating awareness and gathering food for a camp and sending it up. It's just an incredible experience, and Wolverine is like a big part of that for us now, as well as all the other supporters and support work that happens. So we take our hats off to him, and we ask that everybody keep him in their prayers as well. I think he lost his son a couple of weeks ago, so he's going through that right now. And this past winter he lost his daughter too, so it's been kind of a tragic year for him, and it's really good medicine to do stuff like this. You guys are providing good medicine to him, and please keep it up. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everybody. My name's Claire, and we were asked to speak as settlers and gardeners that live here. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name's Claire, and share some of my experiences with being here, existing as a settler, and growing my own food and learning about that. So there's ways that growing my own food has felt like a form of resistance. resisting the notion that you have to have, in order to get food, you have to have money, you have to spend money. Resisting the idea that we have to rely on suppliers and corporations and other people to nourish ourselves. And also that by growing food and eating seasonally, I feel like I'm resisting this idea of warranted, deserved, and unlimited access to all kinds of food whenever I want, because I know that's not right. But as someone who started to garden, grow food, and connect with the land many years ago, it's taken some time for me to realize the complicated nature of this. I've been deepening my understanding on how I came to be here on this land, which isn't my homeland. This understanding that I'm living on stolen land and in many ways directly benefit from the dispossession of indigenous lands from people all over the world. And it's most definitely complicated my relationship with growing food here and working with the land. There's a growing movement in the city towards going green and a lot of stuff that I think is BS. And I found it hard to connect with, and I've wanted to completely disconnect from it and reject it in lots of ways because I feel like it's missing so much. It's excluding so many people. As lots of us know, to have like local organic food is really expensive. There's a lot of attention put to producing and not to healing. And there's very little acknowledgement of where we're standing, whose land this is, and how poorly it's been stewarded since colonization. So, as a white person who can have a voice and a place and be easily accepted into these movements, I feel a responsibility to speak about these things, to challenge people's thinking in these communities. And when I'm lucky enough to be in a room like this, to listen and see what is needed and what is wanted.
I'm Kelsey. I'm also a settler here who tries to grow food, and yeah, basically I got into gardening, permaculture gardening actually, because in my mind I wanted to figure out how to resist like capitalist systems, and I figured that like learning from natural systems was like the most, I don't know, logical way of doing it. And I was gardening with the purple thistle, guerrilla gardeners down the street or like just in another neighborhood. And we learned a lot about the importance of like learning about the land and learning what the land was like before it was a city. So I learned that we were actually on a wetland where there was like elk and birds of prey and all these things, and now Vernon and Charles area is like an industrial wasteland, and that really hurt my heart. I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I never even thought about like what this used to be before I was here. And from there I started deepening my knowledge by listening to hearing stories of people who are from here. Yeah, and like learning more about like, one, I didn't even know what colonization was before I was 23, and then like learning about the process of colonialism, which still exists today. And since then I was like, this is completely messed up. I can't believe I never knew about this. I can't believe that this entire society of like millions of people in so-called Canada is based on theft and genocide and lies. So I decided that I wasn't going to, or I just like didn't want to contribute to it anymore, and it's impossible basically not to contribute to it, but I figured that I would try to at least change some of the systems as much as I possibly could. And so I started learning more about what perpetuates these systems, and it turns out it's basically everything. Yeah, from like, and like I think one of the biggest things is like there's these narratives that we learn, like that Canada is this peaceful, really like inviting, welcoming country that has always been here, and also that, yeah, we're like this multicultural like, I think what was the word that people call it, like that stew? Like, I don't know.
Melting pot?
The melting pot. Yeah, oh yeah, we're just like melting pot. But in reality, like how we treat any person who is brown, who is from here, like indigenous to this land or indigenous to any land, is disgusting, and I believe in being accountable for that as a person who is a Canadian citizen. So anything from like how like 70% of mining in the world is owned by Canadian companies, which is contributing, and like mining here like is contributing to major like devastated like contamination and like people and animals and land getting sick to a devastating degree, and also contributing to like that, how that contributes to the warming of the oceans, and how that creates superstorms to indigenous lands all over the world, including the Philippines, which is where my mom came from. And how the Typhoon Yolanda basically is one example of many where indigenous people are forced into more poverty, and those who are fighting for the land and fighting for their communities and trying to supply food for their communities are actually just getting murdered by their government and forced into like being political refugees in their own homelands. And like that's happening everywhere. It's happening here. People are dying here too, and it's just important to learn more and more how all of these structures, these like strategies to make it so that colonialism can continue today, and globalization and free market capitalism can continue today. It's important to learn these things so that we can change them. And I guess like one last thing is that I believe that learning to be accountable, learning the protocols, because when we don't learn the protocols, we're just silencing the fact that there are protocols here, and there are people here, and we have to follow that. And also just like that the work that we do needs to be based on like real relationships, like real relationships that are founded on like trust and joy and compassion and friendship. Just because when we have those relationships, it means that when we do things together, that's going to be our foundation, and then we can create, then whatever it is that we create will have that like trust, friendship, compassion, joy that will be integrated into whatever newness that we create. And I believe that that's absolutely necessary for creating change. And thank you, Cease, and everybody for having us here, and you guys for coming down. It's awesome. So hope that was
White Coat White Up, Escorts Don Morrison in Secwepemc. I've just greeted you all in my Secwepemc language, and I said hello everyone. My name is Don Morrison, and I want to start first of all to say thank you to Cease and her ancestors for having us here on their beautiful land in Coast Salish territory, and now this beautiful space that you've just opened up. I'm so excited about all the events that we can have here.
We're so happy to host you all.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thanks to Caleb for organizing this. And Caleb contacted me and asked if I would come and speak. And I said sure, because Wolverine, married to my Auntie Flora Sampson in my home community of Adams Lake in Misconlith in the Secwepemc territory, and I was happy to come and talk, and I can think of a lot of things that I want to share about Jonesy, about Wolverine, and how he inspired a lot of the work that I've been doing on Indigenous food sovereignty over a number of years. And I went home to learn about my people in the year 2000. I didn't get to grow up. My mom was in residential school, and along with her whole family, all my aunts and uncles. And it really did a good job at tearing our community apart and our families apart. And so my mom and her family were dispossessed from the land and from the community, along with many others who because the government had allocated really small pieces of land and there wasn't enough, and there was a lot of violence, lateral violence and healing that needed to happen. So it was easiest for my grandmother to leave the community after she had been torn down by having all her children taken away, and my grandfather was killed in a logging accident. So they moved up into the Okanagan, where they worked in the orchards, basically as slave labor, to start to contribute to the food system that we now know. The agri-food system that we see actually led to the colonial expansion. So when I went home to learn about who I was from my people, after having studied plants my whole entire life, and working in gardens, and so I had the agri-food system, the mainstream colonial education around that. But when I went home, I wanted to learn from my people about who I was as Secwepemc, what were our foods, and I went home to heal, and I went home fully knowing who my people were, very strong political advocates. The late Grand Chief George Manuel, who led the Canadian Constitution Express, had Aboriginal title and rights entrenched in the Section 35(1) of the Canadian Constitution. The Child Caravan was led out of the Splatine community, many of whom are my relatives. The Gustafson Lake Standoff was led by Wolverine and by Auntie Flora Sampson and many of my cousins and people that were there and involved in that. So I went home knowing full well who my people were, but not knowing who I was in relation to them. So I went home, and at that time we had set up the first camp at Secwepemc, and that's the area known to our people, and the translation is the highest alpine mountains, and the white people call it the Sun Peak Ski Resort. And so at that time, the Sun Peaks had stripped 5 of the last mountains, and it's a really important sacred vision questing, spiritual place for our ceremonies, and hunting for moose, and gathering medicines, picking berries. And the highest alpine mountains are the most sacred place, and our name Secwepemc actually translates to the people of the land, where the water flows from the highest mountains through the rivers on its way to the ocean. So our people's identity, our name, is strongly linked to the highest mountains, to the rivers, and in relation to our Coast Salish relatives that inhabit the areas around the ocean here. So that area was really important to us, and the corporations and the governments, when they come into our territories, they know how to divide us up. That was how they were able to settle. And so they started working with some of the elected chiefs who bought into their corporate values, and it divided the community, because there were those of us who were maintaining the traditional values of the land and the food system, the way our ancestors have known, the way the land speaks to us really deeply in our ancestral memories. And so really passionate elders and youth and people. There were 91 arrests. Even some of the elders were put in jail over the protest camps that happened up at Secwepemc. And so our community was really divided. And I remember what Wolverine said to me at that time, because I was new to the community and I didn't know how to help. And I wanted to help, and I knew that working in the band office wouldn't help, because those policies that DIA created were very divisive. And so I quit my job at the band office, and I started, I got some funding, and I started Indigenous Education Community Development Services. I wrote a business plan, and I was funded for a year to do that work. And I did that, and so I organized projects and worked with existing projects in the communities to around the theme of ecocultural restoration and food sovereignty. And I choose the theme of food sovereignty because I remember Wolverine Jonesy saying that food will be what brings the people together. And so it just seemed like the framework that I could work with the community in and get to know people on more of a positive note outside of the government elected system. So, so that's what I did. And outside of like some really intense personal healing that came with going home, for many people, up to 50% of Indigenous peoples across what is known as Canada have been dispossessed from their home communities. Many of them actually live here. Vancouver and Toronto are two of the biggest urban Aboriginal communities. And so along with that lifestyle, you know, there's disconnection from our families and communities and all the spiritual illness that comes with that. So there's a lot of mental health issues, a lot of substance abuse issues. All you have to do is go down Main and Hastings and see how overrepresented Indigenous peoples are, and you'll see the sickness that comes from that spiritual disconnection from our homes and our families, and healing from the residential school, and all of that's really recent. That's still happening now. So for me, when I went home, I was giving up a cocaine addiction, an alcohol addiction, smoking cigarettes, and all of the mental illness underneath that over several years through my childhood, being the eldest in the first generation intergenerational impacts of residential school. So I was purging heavily. I had quit sugar, I quit yeast, I quit dairy and wheat, and then the drugs and the alcohol. So I was purging pretty heavily for about a year or two, and Wolverine took me to the mountains and showed me which medicine would help me. And I get kind of emotional talking about it, like I'm stronger now, I can talk about it, but I couldn't. I couldn't talk about it for many years, so, but I'm telling you now because he is a very powerful man. He taught me not only which medicine to use, but he taught me how to prepare it, because there's a whole lot of protocol that comes with going out to harvest, to be in a relationship with the plants, the foods, the medicines. So it saved me, and it changed my life, and it motivated me deeply to do this work on food sovereignty. And I think because our personal healing stories, and my personal healing story is so directly connected to the land and the culture and the food and learning, my personal learning, I think it's really strengthened my role in the movement. It's inspired me, like, to really, the food sovereignty movement, Indigenous food sovereignty movement with the BC Food Systems Network has traveled around the world. There's a huge extended web of relations that, you know, it's not just the food sovereignty movement, but it's all the relationships that other people in other circles that are doing, that are kind of all coming together in some way around food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is a term that was introduced into the World Food Summit in the 1990s, and it was introduced by global peasant farmers movement, La Via Campesina, and it consists of about 200 million small-scale farmers, fisher people, and Indigenous peoples who are resisting the corporate food system. And there's that group of 200 million people are growing 70% of the world's food. It's a huge movement. And in Canada, we're in a really unique situation because, well, the late Grand Chief George Manuel wrote a book called The Fourth World, and he talks about how in Canada, Indigenous peoples live in third world conditions within what's known as a first world country. So he called it the fourth world. And so I was recently invited by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to go to Peru to share in the work that I've been doing with weaving an Indigenous narrative into a bioregional food systems design at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And it's building on a lot of years of mobilizing communities and talking about these issues. And then looking at the literature that's been generated mostly by NGOs. Indigenous peoples were essentially made invisible in the agenda for research and development in the agri-food system. That was why the agri-food system was actually designed, was to dispossess us and to set up this land and water rights-based strategy. So my research has been weaving, making Indigenous peoples visible and telling a whole different story about the food system. So Wolverine has inspired a lot, and I'm really grateful that I've had the time over the last couple of years to sit and do research and contemplate and kind of bring together what a lot of different people are saying. And looking forward to launching that paper on, hopefully by May 1st, but I have a huge Indigenous advisory committee, 10 people, CIS is one of them. Mostly post-sales, but I also have Joseph Gonzalez, who's worked at the international level of Indigenous food sovereignty, so that we can start to assert Indigenous people's voice, especially from Canada, who, even the United Nations looks at Indigenous people in Canada and says, oh, well, what's the problem? The government's taking care of you guys, and they don't realize that we have we have pretty significant challenges because of the relationship to coloniality here. So I guess that's all. It's just mostly just to give you an idea of kind of what Wolverine has inspired. And I told him I was coming here today, and he really appreciates the efforts and the support that people are giving. I was in Chase for my cousin's funeral, Blaine, and it's a pretty sad time right now. But Jones is really strong, and Auntie Flora are very, very strong people, and he remains to be. It blows me away. He takes care of 50 acres almost single-handedly. There are people that come and go in the community and help when they can, but for the most part, he keeps that farm going. It's quite amazing. And our people have adopted agriculture as a way to supplement our diets, because we don't have the same access to the traditional foods that we once relied on. And knowing that hunting and gathering societies are the most sustainable adaptation strategies of humanity. They existed for thousands of years before plants and animals were domesticated in the agri-food system that started traveling around the world about 12,000 years ago. So for 90% of the time that humans have existed on this planet, we've been hunters and gatherers. So that's partly what my narrative, my research is doing, is trying to broaden and expand people's thinking around the food system. It goes beyond the agriculture-centric conversation, even though we know we've adopted agriculture to an extent because we've had to, and it's helpful. And so Wolverine is a model of how we live in both realities, and but it really is a community effort that is needed to be able to grow food in agriculture, because a lot of times the seasonal calendar would have us out picking berries or fishing or hunting. So in order for Wolverine to be able to grow the food, he needs support from the hunters, from the fisher people, and especially this year because there was a death in the family. The cultural protocol means that they're not supposed to do do the work. So when a family is grieving, it's usually for a year after that they're supposed to. The community needs to step up and do that work for them. So I think this effort is one of the piece of that, and I think he really appreciates it. So thank you for having me. I understand.
from down south up to up north and working in the Maya and Excel garden. Please welcome Lix Lopez.
처음 sis 조금만 잠깐 앞 동태는 컴팍트로 the long lecture 장르 거의 아침 이게 Lix Lopez Cham kina tehon klachal kay Mayas tehon nam ihal Guatemala. Good evening. My name is Lix Lopez, and first of all, I would like to thank CIS for allowing us to be here on your territory, your land, because we are, I think, we're all foreigners. We're just visitors on this land. I'm from Guatemala, Maya. I have been in Canada since 1980. As you're aware, humanity is facing difficult times, lots of challenges, and we hear of wars going on everywhere, natural disasters taking place, but somehow we don't, although we see it in the news, we read it in the paper, but when it doesn't touch us directly, I think most people don't really care much. But there's one more among other things. One issue that I think it touches us all directly, and that is the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. The quality of life has deteriorated. That's why we hear there are so many diseases which 50 years, 100 years ago we never heard of. But I think the food, it's something that touches us directly, because we have to nourish ourselves. It all depends on the type of food we put into our body. It's the type of health that we have. But let's just leave that for a moment, and then we get to a bit of the history of the Maya in Exile garden, which the name is quite interesting. Our people, the Maya people, as you know, you have read in the literature or saw programs on TV, Our people have been for thousands of years agricultural people. In fact, one of the food that many people consume today, not so much in Canada, but in Central South America, is corn. Corn came as a gift from the Great Spirit, from the Creator. It was given to our people thousands and thousands of years ago. It is thanks to the corn that our people have survived. Sometimes I laugh when I heard on TV or read somewhere an article when they talk about the Mayas, those who built the pyramids in Yucatan, Chichen Itza, Tikal, Tulum, Palenque, they're very familiar with them. But they always refer to, as if the Maya people vanished. Those are the Maya people. But we are still today. In spite of the fact that statistics always diminish the number of our people. They say that today in Guatemala, for example, we are only 38% of the population. But in reality, we are at least 70% of the population in Guatemala. And if we count, or if we take into consideration all the other Maya people living in Mexico, in Belize, Yucatan, the Yucatan Peninsula, Chiapas, part of El Salvador, Honduras. Because that's all our traditional territory. Before 1524 or 1522, that was all the Maya territory. So, and our people live all over in that territory. We can count easily 13 million Mayan people living today. Speaking, there are about 30 different Mayan languages spoken today. I speak Hmong, one of the Mayan languages. So, when you think about those numbers, 13 million people, maybe more, the culture, the language, spirituality too. So the corn, I was saying, it came as a gift from the Great Spirit to our people. And it is because of the corn that a culture, the Maya culture, that all the big academics talk about, evolve or develop. But behind all this, there's this spiritual component, and that is that since it was a gift from the Great Spirit, so we have to honor. So the culture, the planting of the corn from when it is planted in the ground until it is harvested. There are ceremonies involved in that. because we are conscious that we have to always be in tune with nature, with Mother Earth, and with the Great Spirit. Because often those many academics always say, well, the Mayas built those cities, those pyramids. There were some even say, oh, there were aliens who came to help. But it is, I think, because people were living in tune, in harmony with nature, with the land, with the energies around, that all that was possible. So our people have been agricultural for how long? Well, since the corn was given to our people. And many people may think, oh, it's just a legend, that's how it is treated. But the actual place where the corn came from is from the broken place, which is a mountain, a rocky mountain near the Mexican border. It's only about 50 kilometers from my hometown. Not even that. Maybe the corn came out. So it's not a myth. It really happened. But anyhow, so our grandparents, great-grandparents, and all those who have preceded us have always been agricultural people and have planted corn, beans, squash, and other greens that grow with the corn and with the beans. So in 1985, when the political repression was taking place in Guatemala, like in the early 80s, thousands and thousands of people were massacred, died, and there are still people who are displaced in Guatemala, and many thousands remain in Mexico. They chose to remain in Mexico after all these years. So a few in 1985 were able to make their way to the States, although Canada had open arm for refugees from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala in those years, not anymore. So many people came then from Guatemala, from those countries, but very few Maya people, because the people wanted to hold on to the land, be close to the homeland as much as possible. And that's why the first Maya family came in 1985 here in Vancouver. And then the same year, a couple of other families arrived. So one day, we were talking around the table, having something to eat, having some, no tortillas then. We started talking about feeling a bit homesick because many left in difficult conditions, not because they wanted to leave. I came from through a different way. I didn't come as refugee, but then I couldn't go back because of the situation. Anyways, we started talking about families, and then we got to talk about the possibility of having a garden. Continue with the tradition of our grandparents, great-grandparents, our parents to have corn, beans, because we grew up with that. That's our bread. Tortillas in the morning for breakfast, tortilla for lunch, tortilla for dinner, and then tortilla for drink. Or not tortilla, but corn dough for diluted in water for drink. So, and then the tamales. So we started talking about having the possibility of having a garden, to have some corn on the top, have beans, and but it was hard. In the city, it's always a challenge to find a place. So a friend of ours of the Maya group then came and said, "Well, I live in Morrison Island. I don't know if you all know where Morrison Island is. There are 3 little islands in the middle of the Fraser River by Portman Bridge." So she said, "Well, we live in Morrison Island. We have some land there. You are welcome to come and plant, have a garden if you want." So we welcomed the idea, and there we went. Started in 1987 then. So we started planting corn. We got the seeds and corn and beans and bledo. That's the amaranth from Guatemala. Good thing we didn't get caught. But anyways, so we started planting those seeds, and we got a garden going. It was a challenge living in Vancouver, going all the way out to the Morrison Island, having to take a ferry to get to the island. So we gardened there until 1999, and then among the supporters there was a professor and a student from UBC who had the idea. We had been talking about it would be nice to have a garden closer to Vancouver. So the student said, "Well, I know about a program at UBC Garden, Roots and Shoots, and there's a group of people. I think they were from Korea, who were having a garden." And so she said, "I will contact the UBC farm and see if the group can get a piece of land there." And so that's how we started corresponding with UBC farm, and then in 2000 we were accepted and we started gardening there in 2002 at UBC farm. And so we have been there since. We grow corn, beans, squash, all other greens around July, August. We sell a little bit, some in the market on Saturdays. So there we have the garden. But to continue with the traditional practice, also we asked the farm if we could have a ceremony when we are before planting, and then at the end when we are before we harvest. this is to ask permission. When we, before we plant, we ask permission to Mother Earth, to the Creator, that we're going to start the garden, we're going to break the land. And at the end, when before we harvest, we have another ceremony to thank Mother Earth and the Creator for all what we have harvest, or what we're going to harvest. Because I think we have forgotten that we take everything for granted, that everything just grows. But we don't, unfortunately, because of the society in which we live, has become so materialistic that we're not alone on this world, on Mother Earth. There are also other energies, there are spirits of the ancestors, the spirit of the land. So I think that's one of the downfalls of modern society. Almost all indigenous peoples honor the earth, have to ask permission. The mountains, the rivers, all have a spirit. And if we want to get something, we have to ask permission. But now we see about the mining corporations. What they do is just go and grab whatever they can. When they want to construct a dam, they just go and build it without taking in consideration the lives of humans and other species that live in the area. So, but this is just to say how the spiritual component it's so important. During the season that is from May to end of September, that's when the garden is going on. There are tours of people who want to have a tour in the garden. We share the products in the market, and also it is really good to eat and savor something that comes from the soil and that has no pesticide or has no other chemicals. So you can feel the difference. Those are the benefits. Many, or if not most, of children today, and even adults, I would think, living in the cities like Vancouver, Toronto, the US, and everywhere. I think that all the fruits and vegetables that we can buy all the year around, they just grow and come without any work that has been put in. There's lots of work that it is involved when you are gardening or you're planting. But it's good also to keep the hands in the soil. So it is important for children to be educated, to know where the food comes from. I have a almost 3.5-year-old grandson. His name is Forrest Kame. he has a little plot near Commercial and 7th. Well, I guess I got it for him. So I take him there to garden. The idea is to teach him that he has to put his hand in the soil to get in touch with the soil. Don't be afraid of getting the hands dirty, because I think we live with germs anyways. So it's important. It's healthy. So I think that's something that has to happen. And I think I know probably all of you are involved one way or another in gardening, growing your own food. That's great. But I think, and there are probably many other people who are doing the same thing. But I think we are like the seeds. Because I think it is good to know how to plant the food, or how to grow your own food. My father always told me something that I always keep in mind. I always remember. They're both gone to the spirit world, but my father told me one day. He pushed us to get to school, to go get an education. But then one day he said, it is good to know how to manipulate, how to use the pen, the pencil. But don't forget to know how to use the machete and the how do you call it? Asado hoes? The hoes? Because he said, it's good that you know how to read, how to write, but what would happen if one day you lose your job? You can survive. You can grow your own food if you're not afraid of putting your hand in the soil and take the machete and the hoe to work with it. And I think it's very, very true. I always think of those words. Because what would happen if something happens, like the major roads break down, where all the trucks come to Vancouver full of vegetables and fruits? What do you know? Nothing. So, but if you can grow your own food, that's no problem. So, I think it is a very, very important that you are all involved in this, and it's important also to support those like Wolverine, to support the work that he's doing, and we just have to continue with the work. And thank you for giving me the time to say some words. Chonte also akong khongshim sonap kapyol ma chopal. Thank you. Those are my few words.
Thank you so much for everybody who's spoken and shared so much. I don't have anything to add there. Everybody said everything that needs to be said. So glad to see so many people I haven't met before. With the silent auction, you have another five-ish minutes to try to outbid someone and raise money for this amazing person and this amazing cause that we've all heard about so much all tonight. we're sure you're all inspired. Continue to build community and connect with amazing line defenders, and keep following up on Wolverine and Dawn's work and Lish's work and the UC Garden and the New Stone Camp. But thank you so much. You all are lovely. Support the Tea House. Come back again. Keep connected. Love you all.
Thank you.